What you're not reading about is the government actually abusing these programs and listening in on people's phone calls or inappropriately reading people's emails. What you're hearing about is the prospect that these could be abused. Now, part of the reason they're not abused is because these checks are in place.
Really? Well, that was President Obama just a week ago reassuring Americans that the National Security Agency was not listening to your phone calls or reading your emails. Well, there's a bombshell new report today.
The United States government has broken privacy rules while snooping on Americans not once or twice, but thousands of times every year since Congress first authorized the program back in 2008. This new word is according to just released top secret documents, which the NSA leaker Ed Snowden gave to the Washington Post newspaper earlier this summer. According to the Post reporting, the National Security Agency has repeatedly read Americans' emails and listened in on Americans' phone calls. They were not terror suspects. They were not doing anything suspicious, nothing. Everyday Americans whose private conversations wound up in the government's hands. Some of the cases look like simple mistakes, things like entering a wrong phone number and keeping tabs on the wrong person. But some cases are much more serious, like the NSA apparently ignoring a court order. In one instance, the agency started a new surveillance program without getting permission from the court that oversees it. The court finally did find out and ruled it unconstitutional, but by then, that sketchy program had been up and running for many months. Of course, the court and Congress are supposed to be keeping surveillance programs in check, but the Washington Post reports Congress and that court rarely see the sort of details in these documents. In fact, one of them directs staffers to remove some details from reports of the agencies that the agency oversees. In another case, the NSA decided it did not need to report on these mistakes at all. The NSA is downplaying the thousands and thousands of mistakes, as you might imagine. One official told the Washington Post they're a small fraction of the total phone calls and emails the agency tracks. In a statement to Fox News, an agency official said, quote, "When NSA makes a mistake in carrying out its foreign intelligence mission, the agency reports the issue internally and to federal overseers and aggressively gets to the bottom of it."
Chris Steyerwalt joins us, Fox News digital politics editor, host of Power Play on FoxNews.com. Chris, look, some of this was unintended. It was accidental, but significant intrusions, according to this audit, were not accidental. And equally disturbing was this effort not to report it, to cover it up, and a further effort to keep the FISA court, the judges who were supposed to be supervising this, completely in the dark. So how troubling is this for President Obama?
Big time. Look, here's the thing. The president has tried to be a little flip, a little dismissive about the whole thing. The first interview he gave on this was on The Tonight Show, for goodness sakes. And he said, well, we don't domestically spy. He's waved away these concerns. The situation for the president is that there is a growing coalition on the left and on the right that is concerned either of the existence of these programs or of the misuse of these programs. And what we saw reported in the Washington Post via Edward Snowden is that abuse occurs. And probably the most troubling in all of this is what we have heard about efforts to evade oversight and evade the FISA court that is supposed to be, that we have heard throughout this process, is the guardian, is the watchdog on this. So for the president, it's something more than a trip to Jay Leno's couch is probably necessary to talk to the American people about this.
And what's also troubling is this audit only involved one operating unit, and there are a great many. And there were 2,776 intrusions in that one unit, but for every intrusion, it could include thousands of intercepts of Americans' conversations and emails. So you do the math. I mean, Chris, you could be talking about millions of folks, and yet you mentioned Leno's couch. Here it is. Take a listen.
We put in some additional safeguards to make sure that there's federal court oversight as well as congressional oversight, that there is no spying on Americans. We don't have a domestic spying program.
Was the president dishonest, or was he simply utterly uninformed and clueless? I suppose the third alternative is that he's sloppy and careless with the facts, which some people say he is wont to do.
Well, we'll go. How about Clintonian parsing? How about if you and we see a lot of this. Do you collect data? We are not authorized. So answering the question however you want, and specific parsing that may be technically true, but gives a misleading sense to the American people. Greg, this is the takeaway for the president. If he believes that these programs are as necessary as he says that they are, at a moment that the American people are increasingly anxious about what the government knows about them, how they track them, from their health records in Obamacare all the way to their phone calls. As Americans become increasingly anxious about this, the president is going to have to confront his political base at some point and say, look, abuses occur, this isn't perfect, it's wrong, but it's necessary, and I am here to defend it. He cannot wave it away, because if he does, he will lose it, and so will his successors.
Well, also buried in this audit is the fact that when one of the FISA judges found out about a program that had not even been disclosed to the court, he said, wait a minute, this is a violation of the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution. Stop it. And the best I can tell is there's no evidence that it was ever stopped.
Well, Dennis Kucinich is a former Democratic congressman from Ohio and a Fox News contributor, and I'm happy to welcome him now. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
The critics definitely want to know how you can defend the fact that this happened thousands of times and still call it inadvertent, which is what they're arguing. Can you?
It doesn't pass the smells test. I mean, it's time that government stop the spying and stop the lying. The American people haven't been given a straight story from our government about this right from the beginning. Our Constitution is being attacked. Our Fourth Amendment rights are being annihilated. It has an effect on the First Amendment, the self-censorship that occurs when people are worried about saying things or putting notes on the internet that might cause the government to start looking over their shoulder. This is not the America that most of us grew up in and believe in. We really need to change this and not just talk about it.
It's the argument that you're making. It's fascinating because Peggy Noonan, in a Wall Street Journal article that she had written, also says privacy lost today, right of free speech tomorrow. Is that where we're headed?
Peggy Noonan's article is worth reading by all Americans because it hits the nail right on the head. You know, what we're being told right now in this time and place is that we don't have any expectation of privacy. Yet privacy is a fundamental human right, and it doesn't come from the government. It's not the government that gives us the right of privacy. We have that before the government is established. And we have to ask ourselves whether or not our government has gotten so far away from the people that it doesn't even understand some of the basic principles on which this particular government was formed.
I want to ask you this, Congressman, because the agency argues that they're run by humans and that this is, human error. But when you're talking about a security agency and our national security, should we not have the very best humans you can find and strict guidelines that make sure that our privacy isn't obstructed? It is a tenet, as you say, that we hold very valuable in this country.
We're all human. We accept that. But there's another question here that's even deeper. Are these humans who read the Constitution of the United States, who understand the Fourth Amendment against unreasonable search and seizure? Do these humans understand the First Amendment from which all these other rights are protected? So it's not adequate to accept the NSA's explanations, but they don't make the final call. This final call is made in the White House, and the president cannot settle this with Jay Leno on the Tonight Show. He has to come before the American people and say what he's going to do about stopping this overreach by the government into the private lives of the American people. It's time that we reclaim the country that we know and love. And it begins with affirming the basic principles in the Constitution, and our president has to firmly stand on the side of that, not with words, not with fancy speeches, but with actual executive action that strongly constrains the activities of the National Security Agency.
I hear what you're saying, and I hear what you're calling for, and they are tasked with protecting our privacy, our government, at the same time rooting out terror and national security threats. But I'm wondering, the thing that troubles lawyers like myself is the fact that they went on with methodology for a period of time without advising the FISA court, who is also responsible for overseeing their methods. And then they came later and said, oh, by the way, we're doing it this way. And it was ruled unconstitutional. So for the type of transparency and enforcement you want, when is it going to come and who has to call for it?
Well, what you just described is an obstruction of justice that occurred within the system, the subversion of the FISA court and their oversight responsibilities. This is something that's very serious. Now, when is it going to come? That's a that's a question the White House has to answer, because NSA it cannot be a law unto itself. And you know, they keep Congress in the dark, they keep FISA in the dark, and either the White House is in the dark or it's complicit in what the NSA is doing.
Lieutenant Colonel Michael Kay is here, an international analyst and former advisor to Britain's Ministry of Defense. We don't have any privacy anymore, do we?
I think what's important first to look at, Shep, and this is very important, is the context in which the NSA operates at the moment. It's got a very, very sensitive role, and it's sensitive because the threat is unconventional, it's irregular, and it's asymmetric. And what that means is that we don't know where the threat's coming from, we don't know who is going to be implementing the threat, and we don't know what the threat's actually going to be. So in accordance with that, the US has to take unconventional methods, and the NSA has to take unconventional methods in order to counter that threat in some way. We also need to understand that the threat isn't just from an external single source country.
You know what it feels like, though? Excuse me for interrupting, but it feels like they're the threat sometimes. What they have done here is trampled all over the Constitution, haven't they? Haven't they trampled over people's rights to privacy and freedom from unreasonable search and seizure? I mean, how can they do this?
Well, I mean, it's quite easy to see that, and I can understand why you see that point of view.
Because it's what they're doing.
But we go back to the argument, and we go back to the debate on civil liberties versus national security. And I think what's happened here is that in order for the NSA to conduct their business, intelligence isn't open source. Intelligence has to be closed source, because if it's not closed source, then you're going to compromise the safety of the people, US citizens abroad and at homeland, and also the safety of the infrastructure. So it has to be closed source. But with that, in hand comes the respect and the confidence in the US public for the NSA and the administration to do their job. And clearly, that's a little bit out of kilter at the moment.
Yeah, clearly it is. I mean, at one point I was thinking I probably should just start CCing the NSA at the bottom of every email, but it appears it's unnecessary. They've got them anyway.
Well, I think the NSA have an incredibly hard job to do. I'm not defending them, but they have.
Well, actually, you kind of are defending them.
Hear me out here, Shep. They are looking for a needle in a haystack when it comes to intelligence. I used to hunt these guys in Baghdad for many, many years, and what would trigger a single mission is months and months, if not years, of intelligence. And if at any point that intelligence trail was compromised through what we saw a couple of weeks ago or last week with the US embassy closures, then you have to reset, and then that mission doesn't go ahead. So there is a lot that goes on behind closed doors here. It's not just about monitoring the emails of US citizens. It actually is it's almost like a blanket search that has to pick up maybe a couple of sound bites or a couple of code words that we think Al-Qaeda are using.
But you know, if they need to search everything, if they need to see everybody's emails and listen to every phone call, we need to change the Constitution, don't we?
I couldn't agree more. And
so if we need to change the Constitution, maybe they ought to work on that. But as long as we're working under this Constitution, we got rules around here, and they have to follow them. We have this document that was put together by our forefathers. If this bunch running the place now wants to change it, there's a process for that. In the meantime, they got to play by the rules. I run the traffic light, I get a ticket. They steal my emails, they can't do that.
Sure, it's a good point, but, you know, forgive me for saying that when the forefathers made the Constitution and put the Constitution together, Al-Qaeda didn't exist.
Then why isn't somebody talking about changing the Constitution rather than going around it or going straight through it with a ramrod?
And this is the debate that we need to have.
Yeah, well, maybe they need to talk. I don't hear anybody talking about changing the Constitution. I hear them talking about breaking it.